Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the SOMM TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. Today is my Christmas. We're back with our Halloween and horror and wine/drinks episode. Claire Coppi and I, you know Claire from SOMM TV, about 2 years ago did an episode of horror films, and we've been asked repeatedly to do more of this. And we're finally back with another one. Here's the good news. We're joined by someone who's the real deal in the screenwriting Hollywood world. His name is Zack Stentz. And he has written for many things you've heard of, like Thor and X-Men First Class, and worked with J.J. Abrams on Fringe and a ton of other stuff. He's much more qualified than a documentarian who makes things about wine, but I'm going to see if I can hold my own with him. So I hope all of you are ready for a podcast that is peripherally about wine, but we're going to talk about movies that just in time you have to watch. Also, don't forget, subscribe to SOMM TV, sommtv.com. It's $49.99 for a year, and guess what? Christmas is coming. And you have somebody you're like, do I get something for them? This is an easy one. $50, you're done. They've got all this content, and they're going to be very happy that you got them this gift. So sommtv.com, $49.99 for an entire year. Claire Coppi and Zach, how are you guys? I was up till 4 a.m. watching your movies, and I am extraordinarily pumped for this. I'm trying to keep myself contained.
We're doing great. And we're, I know we talked a little bit before this, and I was really delighted to see that at least one of those movies was something that you hadn't seen before, because it's always fun to introduce people to what I consider kind of hidden gems of horror.
This is Claire and I have a very special thing. We have one of the next SOMM films coming, and the trailer is debuting. It may have already debuted by the time this is airing, for Ghosts of Spring Mountain, our ghost story. And it is a wild ass movie. And Claire is the main character. And
it's
Claire,
intense.
It's intense. And so it's
Wow.
very fun. Yeah, it's very fun for Claire and I to do this pod with this film in our pocket, to say the least.
Yeah, it was.
Ooh.
Yeah, we visited some haunted wineries, and it. They were definitely haunted. It was terrifying. I wasn't expecting what happened to happen. I wasn't expecting it for it to be that intense.
Were you kind of a skeptic going in, and then like stuff happened that made you?
Not so much. I mean, like I believe in a lot of that stuff, and I think it's pretty cool, and I've had some experiences in my past. But I mean, you always go in like a little skeptical, because your experience will not always be the same other people's experience, but like it's palpable when you enter some of these spaces. And then some of the stuff that happens, like I wish someone could come in and explain away to me. And we do have a couple other people that joined me up there, a winemaker and a wine writer, who are both pretty skeptical coming in. And one of them was in tears at one point because they were so freaked out. So
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see this. Where's it going to debut?
Well, news on all of that coming. This has been a film. Since the first SOMM, I have not had more people ask me when the F is this movie coming, than this one. It's been pretty wild. Claire takes a period accurate early 1900s, late 1800s Ouija board into these places. And it's let's just say like it's it's kind of a riff on ghost hunting, but I will say it's not, it's got great mystery component to it. It's pretty jumpy from a documentary standpoint, especially.
I will say, back in college, my last year of college, I lived with a bunch of friends in a former church in Santa Cruz.
Oh my God.
And we found a Ouija board in the shed.
No.
And let's just say, never use a Ouija board you find in the shed behind a former church. And I'll leave it.
Where is it? Where is that Ouija board? We need it. We need it now.
Where is that?
We burned it.
To release the demons inside into the world?
We burned it because the other Ouija board we had told us to burn it.
This is great.
Wait, hold on. Your Ouija board was egging you on. Okay, yeah. Sorry.
We found this Ouija board. We found the Ouija board in the shed, and it started. We were like, "Ooh, let's see." And it was close to Halloween, and the Ouija board started telling us like really freaky things to a degree that it really freaked us out. And then someone else had their own Ouija board like in their room, and they were like, okay, well, let's get out this other Ouija board. And we got out the other Ouija board.
Great idea.
And this second Ouija board told us to burn the first Ouija board. So we went down to, if you know Santa Cruz at all, we went down to Natural Bridges and with the Ouija board and a bunch of lighter fluid and incinerated it on the beach.
Holy shit. Was it like the Hasbro Ouija board that was telling you to burn the OG one?
Exactly.
The like Target Ouija board's like, screw this old guy. I'm the one you want.
Sorry for the digression, but that's my
awesome.
that's my encounter with the supernatural. And then literally the people who lived in the house the year before like came to pick up some old stuff, and I wasn't home at the time, but one of my roommates was like, "So what's up with the Ouija board out in the shed?" And they were like, "You didn't use that, did you?"
Oh, this is good.
You're like, no, definitely not.
The one that we used, and I'll end this convo here, was found in a wall in a house in Baltimore. So it's
that's way too Edgar Allan Poe for me.
It's very Edgar Allan Poe, or like Jumanji.
It's great, but again, I firmly believe, and this goes into the pod, I firmly believe that wine is literally, and this may be other spirits and such, but it's about everything. And this is why we're able to talk about horror films and all this stuff on the podcast, is that you can talk about scary shit, you can talk about sports, you can talk about all this stuff, and it's all still about this stuff because it spider webs out. And so on the topic of this pod, so we've all picked 3 movies. We've all picked something to drink with that movie and a reason. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through from 3 to 1. If we have any overlaps, we'll talk about those at the time somebody mentions it. I don't think we have any overlaps. And I am going to do my absolute best to my mom, who I know is listening. I'll try to stay on track, and I'll try not to swear too much. So hopefully we're okay.
I make no such promises.
So, well, Claire, you and I are notoriously bad at being Victorian on these podcasts. So horror films or thrillers or scary or Halloween themed movies with drinks. Claire, I think you've always started first. I think you should start first this time.
Oh, well, gosh golly,
so
thank you.
Your number 3 movie.
It's something that's relatively new to my horror repertoire, and this is the 2012 film Sinister, starring Ethan Hawke.
I didn't want to move here.
We couldn't afford to live in the old house anymore. Plus, the new story I'm writing is here.
Is the story a good one this time?
I'm gonna write the best book that anybody's ever read. I got a really good feeling about this.
My boyfriend told me to watch it, and it was creepy. We watched it together.
Your boyfriend, Ethan Hawke, creepy. Right?
Yes. But like Gattaca, Ethan Hawke.
Like Gattaca, Ethan Hawke.
Like Gattaca, Ethan Hawke. Or Northman. It's kind of... Anyway, I digress. Sinister. So yeah, it's about a writer, a true crime novelist, who at one point wrote a book that made him very, very famous, but he's kind of dried up. So he moves to this new town with his family, and he moves into the house of where this entire family was hanged on a tree in the backyard. Doesn't tell his wife that he's moved into this house. She's like, "Are we like living a few houses down from a murder house again?" And he's like, "No, we're not." And she's like, "Okay, fine. I don't want to know anything else." And I was like, that's not good marriage material right there, but whatever. So he moves into this house, and he's cleaning out the attic, and he finds this old camera and film reels, and he starts playing them, and it's like family footage of the family that lived in the house, and then it cuts to the end of the family like being filmed, being executed by hanging on this tree. But one of the children is missing in the family, and then he finds all these other reels of all these other families where again one child is missing, and they all die horrifically. Like a bunch of them are duct taped to pool chairs and then dragged into the pool to drown. The rest of the family is like drugged and locked in a car, which is set on fire. A bunch of others are just shot like execution style in their beds. Or no, their throats are slit. And so he's trying to figure out like a child's missing in all of these, and he's trying to unlock the code, but more and more weird shit's happening in this house, right? And throughout the entire time, he's self-medicating by drinking lots and lots of Buffalo Trace. So this is not a stretch of any of imagination. So Buffalo Trace on the rocks, or depending on how stressed you are or close to being murdered, straight out of the bottle. And that's it.
This is great. Zach, do you have a relationship with this film?
I know Scott Derrickson, the director, and Robert Cargill, the writer, a bit. I know them both pretty well, and
cool.
And I like the movie a lot. And it's interesting in that it's very influential, and that it was really the movie that solidified the Jason Blumhouse. We can shoot it in a house for $5 million. One location. Shoot
$3 million.
Shoot it in a
they
house
did this for
like
$3 million.
$3 to $5 million. and it made something like 200 million worldwide, or 100. I mean, it made many multiples.
How did they afford Ethan Hawke for
back
well,
end?
What they do is they take a little bit of money up front in exchange for participating in the upside if it makes lots of money. And the thing is, with like Jason Blum can't lose with that model, because if the movie doesn't turn out well, they sell it direct to video. Or to the streamers, and they still make a profit. It's a very smart financial model. But I like the film. You know, I am talking about like all of the behind the scenes stuff, but the movie itself, I think, is it was probably the most effective of that genre up until Get Out, which is the same model, but like by bringing in the social aspect. Sent that formula in a completely different direction.
Would Conjuring fall into that at all? I guess they
Conjuring
go outside of it
cost
a little bit
more. Conjuring is like the James Wan. It is the whole
still Jason Blum.
James Wan camp. Yeah, now James Wan's gone off on his own, but yeah, The Conjuring's become like a whole thing. It's like a whole.
So we did both Get Out and The Conjuring on the first episode of this, which you should listen to. But I think it's interesting. This model is taking what I think 70s, 60s, I mean, even going back to the 50s and 40s horror really successfully did, in that they had no money. And what they did is turned it on their head and said, the money's upside down. And I think what Jason Blum has done, I think Paranormal Activity, obviously, if you've seen that film, is the real model for how they pulled this stuff off, of turning what Blair Witch was into a gigantic, you can repeat it. Whereas Blair Witch is not repeatable.
And let's face it, you know, like horror is one of the last things that people will show up at a movie theater for.
Well, seemingly right now, it's the only thing people will show up for, sadly.
Yeah, horror and Marvel.
Yeah, horror and Marvel, which this director also did. We should say Doctor Strange. But this movie is a really interesting pick for you, Claire. I love it. This is great.
It is. It was good. It was just a new one for me.
Good start, because the good news is the way we're gonna move through these is really going to show an evolution and a de-evolution, a devo of kind of the horror and thriller world here. So Buffalo Trace and Sinister. Okay, so that's number one. Zach, what do you have at your number 3?
My number 3 is a 1974 film called The Beast Must Die.
This is
And
so great.
I love it because it's basically an Agatha Christie locked room murder mystery with a little bit of The Most Dangerous Game in there, except with a werewolf.
When the moon is full, the beast must die.
One of you is a werewolf.
You must track down the werewolf. One of these 8 people is a werewolf.
And it's fascinating too, because it's an early 70s film, and it has a black lead, Calvin Lockhart, which is unusual for the horror of the time. It has Peter Cushing. It has Michael Gambon, aka Dumbledore, in an early role. And the mystery is fun. The scares are fun, and the whole vibe of the entire movie is just delightful to me. And what I would pair it with would be a claret. Or I think I pronounced it right. And I didn't know until recently that just was Brit speak for Bordeaux. Or I guess now the Brits, you know, sometimes they use it to just mean red wine in general. Like it's even like there's a color there, you know, they named a color after it. But like everyone in those, because that's what people in British manors drink. And there's always a glass of, you go look, and there's always a dinner table scene, and there's always a glass of wine at the at the character's hand, and that wine is probably claret.
I started this movie, Zach, at almost midnight last night, and kids are asleep, wife's asleep, house is quiet, and here's what I'm expecting. I was expecting kind of like one of these, I don't know how deep the audience goes, but like Hammer films or something that was kind of like, I was not expecting something as refined as this movie. It is a werewolf mystery. Who's the werewolf? Who's the person that is the werewolf? And it's actually how has it not been remade? It's an amazing premise.
The clues are really it's well constructed. The clues are hidden really well. It's like actually effective as a mystery.
I loved it. I honestly, I mean, to an audience who wants to watch something where you're like, I never expected to watch this film. This thing is high up on my list for movies that should be I don't want to remake movies, but if you have to remake a movie to make somebody realize an earlier movie existed, this is a great candidate because this could be done so well. I mean, could you imagine if Kenneth Branagh directed this film? Yeah. I mean, this would be great.
Directed and starred in, of course.
Probably, of course. He'd play the black lead.
Yeah.
It would be very...
Don't you tempt him. He will.
Too soon.
Bad enough that he plays a Belgian.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the Belgians are very upset that he is. Yeah. Oh God. But it's a really good genre bender, you know, where it's kind of mystery, horror, all that stuff with a werewolf twist. This was a great pull. And I was actually kicking myself when you told me what it was and I hadn't seen it. And so kudos to you.
Oh, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And Claire, I hope you check it out if you haven't already.
I love that cast too. I like those actors and I love Agatha Christie. So
I think you'll really dig it.
The movie that I picked for my number 3 is a movie that represents how I feel right now, working, 17 hours a day on SOMM TV and working on all these movies. And it seems like a softball, but it's also one of the most artsy movies I think that has ever been put into the genre. Most controversial book adaptations probably ever done. And it's The Shining.
I don't suppose they told you anything in Denver about the tragedy we had up here during the winter of 1970? Well, a man named Charles Grady is the winter caretaker. And he came up here with his wife and 2 little girls, I think about 8 and 10. From what I've been told, I mean, he seemed like a completely normal individual. But at some point during the winter, he must have suffered some kind of a complete mental breakdown. He ran amok and killed his family with an axe.
You can rest assured, Mr. Ullman, that's not going to happen with me.
I'm picking one of my absolute favorite films. I can quote every line. I am obsessed with this movie. I love it. Sorry, Mother. It fucked me up beyond absolute belief. For so many years, I saw it. The scene with the woman in the bathtub, it haunts my nightmares. So plot-wise, if you haven't seen The Shining, I don't know where you live that you found podcasts and not The Shining, but it's about a writer
just be avoiding it.
A writer that the question is whether he's actually a writer or not, if he's ever had any success, but he is a writer with writer's block and they take over a hotel, a very large hotel for the winter. And in this hotel, a family was murdered by the patriarch, chopped up in one of the rooms, and they are to tend to this place over the winter and make sure it doesn't freeze over and the pipes stay nice and soft. And of course, really the outcome is poor Shelley Duvall has a hell of a time over the course of a winter, but it's got one of the all-time greatest bartender customer scenes that has ever happened in movies. And that is when Jack Nicholson sits down with Lloyd.
A little slow tonight, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Mr. Torrance. What'll it be?
I'm awfully glad you asked me that, Lloyd. Because I just happen to have 2 20s and 2 10s right here in my wallet. I was afraid they were going to be there till next April. So here's what. You slip me a bottle of bourbon, a little glass, and some ice. You can do that, can't you, Lloyd? You're not too busy, are you?
No, sir. I'm not busy at all.
Good man. You set him up and I'll knock him back, Lloyd. One by one.
And I think in this, obviously you can see, in a lot of these movies, we're always arguing about what are they drinking. This one's easy. He's drinking Jack Daniels. So this isn't much like you did, Claire. This movie is Jack Daniels. You need to pour yourself some Jack Daniels and you need to watch The Shining. And by glass 6, you will be seeing what Jack Nicholson sees. But if you work on a streaming service or you write screenplays like Zach, you understand the frustration that is written in not the subtext, just the text of this damn movie. It is very, very, it's a documentary.
I like it. Jack Daniels, the drink of recovering alcoholics falling off the wagon in the worst way possible.
And then
I'm sure that they love that. Yeah, it's also made in a dry county. So what do you know, it is what it is.
I love The Shining. A friend had a really interesting observation about it. You know that like Stephen King, of course, hates the Kubrick movie.
Of course, hates it deeply. In fact, I'm obsessed with this topic.
My friend had a really interesting theory about why he hates it, which is Stephen King sees himself as Jack, but the Jack of the, Jack was in the novel was very much based on King himself. He was a good guy with a temper and a drinking problem. And Kubrick if you watch the movie, Kubrick kind of turns that on his head, and the movie isn't the tragedy of a good man falling off the wagon. The tragedy is what a nightmare it would be being married to or having as your dad this pretentious would-be author who you have to walk on eggshells around because in fear of him flying off the handle. So I think King is like deeply hurt by the idea that like Jack could actually be a monster to his family.
Ooh.
It's interesting. I mean, Stephen King, I was sort of raised on Stephen King, his books, his movies. I mean, even the bad movies I love. I mean, I'll do an hour on Maximum Overdrive right now, but I would say this. I would say that 99% of his films, a writer is the main character. And we know that Stephen King wrestled deeply with alcoholism and other things. And I think that, in hating this film, and I hope that before I die, I get a chance to talk to Stephen King. I think that there's a lot of self-reflective stuff in this movie that's taken on steroids, and I think that that's probably very painful. And also, he changed the characters. I mean, it was a blonde woman, very beautiful. And then they recasted Shelley Duvall, who I also think is beautiful, but a very different kind of person. And I think that he was frustrated by a lot of that. Plus, he was at a time where he didn't have the chutzpah to say, you have to do it my way, which he has now. If you're going to make a Stephen King film, you do it his way.
But they did that ABC miniseries of The Shining where they followed the book really closely, and they had a good cast, but it isn't nearly as good as the Kubrick movie.
Anywho, that was my number 3 with the Jack Daniels, The Shining, which is sounds like a softball, but it's definitely mentally where I feel right now. So, it is what it is. All right, Claire, what's your number 2?
So number 2, going into my last 2, I'm picking some that go back to my childhood and scared the bejesus out of me. Some people consider this a Christmas film. I consider it horrifying. It is 1984's Gremlins.
Billy Pelser has a nice home.
Billy, is that you?
Yeah, Mom, it's me.
A nice job. A nice girl.
If you're not doing anything this Thursday night, maybe you'd like to go out on a date with me?
I'd love to.
And loving parents who are about to give him...
You're gonna like this. No, don't shake it. We're gonna have to open it now. It won't wait till Christmas.
The most unusual gift he ever got.
What is it?
It's your new pet.
Gremlins was scary, man. Like, freaking A. It was written by Chris Columbus, directed by Joe Dante, who also did The Howling and Piranha. So he loves his creatures. It scared the shit out of me. Like, I was horrified by these little things. Obviously, Gizmo, adorable. But now, like me, don't feed me after midnight. And don't give me water, for God's sakes. Give me wine. So I actually identify with the Gremlins a lot more in my old age. But there's a scene where they're all at Dory's Tavern, and they're all just like being really bad. One of them's got like 5 cigarettes stuffed into its mouth. They're like swinging on the chandeliers, They're all drinking. There's like Coors Light sign everywhere, and they're all just pounding. There's one that keeps chugging Coors Lights. So for me, my number 2 would be Gremlins with a Coors Light. There is a cocktail called a Gremlin as well, but like Coors Light, stuff a few cigarettes into my mouth.
Gremlins actually really freaked me out when I was a kid too. And I think it was, what it really reminded me of? It reminded me of that, of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, of that old Mickey Mouse cartoon where like the brooms keep multiplying because like, that's like
the brooms. Yeah.
It's that's the part of me that it spoke to, was the whole kind of that you cause a problem, and the more you try and solve the problem, the worse it gets, and the bigger the problem gets. And I just, as the striped creatures like keep multiplying, it's like, God, this is just going to get worse and worse, isn't it?
I remember being so horrified by when they like jerry-rigged that old woman's electric chair going up the stairs, and it just like went like 90 miles per hour up straight off the rail out the window, and I was like, oh my God.
I remember as a kid thinking that was funny, and then as an adult I'm like, that's not funny.
See, now I'm the opposite. I'm like, that's kind of hilarious. But when I was a kid, I was like, no.
It's I guess Joe Dante is a big Looney Tunes fan, and there's a lot of that kind of Looney Tunes violence. But when you translate Looney Tunes violence into live action,
it's terrifying.
Different vibe.
It's terrifying. And then they're melting in the water.
Oh God. So I have a real hot take for like film nerds that are listening to this. I think Joe Dante's the original Sam Raimi. Oh, I love it. The dog. You guys can't see this, but Zach has his dog on his gigantic dog on his lap.
That's a good dog.
So my hot take is that Joe Dante is the original Sam Raimi in the way that like mixing comedy and horror in a way that is just, you can't, if anyone else besides the two of them directed the film and it was as uneven in its sheer horror and sheer wackiness, it would totally fall on its ass. Where you see scenes like where the scientist in that lab gets brutally ripped apart, murdered. It's a terrifying scene. And then you have things where they're like putting themselves in blenders and killing themselves and funny, goofy stuff. It's very similar to like, yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, right. To like Evil Dead 2, or like any of the like stuff where you can like mix this horror with this comedy stuff. And Gremlins also has, you can't leave out the Spielberg the Spielberg thing, which is this very glossy, things are very put together. It almost looks like Spielberg could have directed a scene or two. He didn't, but it looks like he could have. It's very accessible.
Yeah, it was that Spielberg 1-2 punch in 1984 of Gremlins and then Temple of Doom that gave us the PG-13 rating, because it was because of the violence in Gremlins and then the guy getting his heart pulled out in Temple of Doom.
Those two created PG-13 rating?
Those two films were the ones that did it.
True
because
story.
that
cool.
People came to the conclusion like, okay, we need something that's like harder than PG-13, but not quite as, but there aren't, boobs. So no R.
Up until recently, I've watched Jaws now with my 9-year-old daughter, but she would always argue it's rated PG. I'm allowed to watch it. And I would say, I just am not ready for you to watch this. And she would be like, Jaws is one of my favorite films, but there was no PG-13. And so a lot of these movies that we think, holy crap, how can they be rated PG? It's because there was no PG-13. So yeah, Zach, good call.
Yeah, my mom took me to a revival of Jaws because we couldn't get into Star Wars because the lines were still around the block.
And
just
Jaws
like,
is still
how
in the
scary
theater.
could it be? And I was like 7 years old. I was 7 years old, and I spent half of the movie in the lobby. And then the one point when I came back from the lobby was the point where like the leg with the tennis shoe still on is like sinking down to the bottom. And I was just,
Yeah,
oh my God.
But these films all sort of have kindred spirits together. I mean, Gremlins, I wanted so bad. It's not on my list, but I wanted to take Poltergeist. I rewatched it 3 nights ago, and that movie is as terrifying as it ever was. And that's still the same Spielberg thing. That gave us the Spielberg that we now have, where there's a bit of an edge, but yet everything still looks and feels very accessible. I know we're way off track and we're so far behind on
Yeah,
time.
wait. Okay. Gremlins with a Coors beer. All right, and cigarettes. Zach,
Okay.
what's your number 2?
And cigarettes. Oh, I love this.
Hit us, Zach.
What do you got for number 2?
My number 2 is a film from 1972 called Horror Express.
For 2 million years in these subterranean caves, a creature of superhuman evil was entombed in a wall of ice, waiting to be free.
and it is a Spanish and British co-production. And basically, the story behind it was they had filmed another movie in Spain, and they had these rail car sets left over, and they asked a screenwriter and a director, okay, can you come up with a new movie that's set on these on a railroad train, on an old time railroad train? And the writer, who is an African-American playwright who had been blacklisted and moved to Spain because of it, came up with this original scenario that was very loosely inspired by the story Who Goes There, which is also the story that inspired The Thing.
The Thing, yeah.
So it's really a very loose retelling of The Thing. It's about essentially an ancient creature, ape-like creature that they find in the ice in Siberia, and they have it on the Trans-Siberian Express, and it thaws and it starts to kill people, and it starts to move from body to body, and once you're dead, your eyes are all white and creepy, and they're trying to figure out who done it. And the interesting thing for Hammer horror fans is that both Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing are in this one, but they both play good guys. They play allies instead of enemies. And then about 2/3 of the way through, all of a sudden, Telly Savalas, aka Kojak, shows up playing a Cossack. Playing a Cossack officer, and it's just it's scary, it's fun, it kind of feels like Hammer horror, but it isn't, and it was
Zach, will you do one minute on Hammer horror and Christopher Lee, aka Saruman from Lord of the
Hammer
Rings?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Hammer, Hammer Studios was a British production company in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in particular, that just cranked out about 1 million horror movies, and including about like 8 or 10 Dracula movies, where Christopher Lee, aka Saruman from Lord of the Rings, would always play Dracula, and he was just this, he was the kind of sophisticated, sexy, dangerous Dracula to a whole generation. And Peter Cushing, aka Grand Moff Tarkin from Star Wars, was Van Helsing, and they would always come up against each other. And there were like really sexy British babes wearing low-cut outfits,
And the plots were always slightly they were hard to understand occasionally.
Yeah,
maybe.
they were hard to understand. There was a lot of times it was, the lack of a budget showed, but there was a vibe to the films that was just always really delightful. And Horror Express, while not being Hammer, has that kind of Hammer vibe. So the story that I find really poignant about how the movie came about is the fact that Peter Cushing had just lost his beloved wife of many years and was in deep mourning. And Christopher Lee had just been cast in this movie, and went to Peter Cushing and said, "Come on, do this movie with me." And he was like, "No, I can't. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do this again." And Christopher Lee said, "You know what? You should be around your friends." And there were other members of the Hammer ensemble in there as well. And so Peter Cushing, even though he was in deep mourning, came and did the movie, and he said afterwards that it was the best thing that he could have done, because he was around friends the entire time, and it really helped cheer him up. So
Aww.
There's a heartwarming story behind this wonderfully horrifying movie. And the wine that I would pair it with is Rioja, simply because it was filmed in Spain, and that's one of my very favorite Spanish wines, especially a nice dry white one on a warm summer evening. So I'm imagining myself popping in the DVD while sipping a nice chilled Rioja and enjoying Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee's friendship.
My number 2 is The Others, a Nicole Kidman starring film that merges the things that I love the absolute most in life, which is history and ghost stories and really, really good filmmaking.
As you can see, the housework has been rather neglected since the servants disappeared almost a week ago.
You mean they just vanished?
Into thin air.
How do you do, children? I'm your new nanny.
This is a tremendously well-made movie, but it's also kind of a prestige piece in a weird way that you wouldn't expect the director who did it to have made. And The Others takes place on an island between the United Kingdom and France, which was the only part of the UK that the Germans took over during World War II. And so they are under Nazi occupation, and they're in this gigantic old house, and the husband's off fighting the war, and they are being visited by ghosts. And it has this this is the one movie I don't want to spoil, because I truly believe that if you can see this film without knowing the twist ending, you will see one of the great twist endings in movies that was a commercial film. I mean, a big, big movie. And so, strangely, this movie is streaming nowhere. In the United States, you can't rent it. You can't buy it. The
That's
DVD
crazy.
is
It was a
expensive
huge
as hell.
hit.
Huge hit. My assumption is it's the culprit of mergers that are happening right now between Fox and Disney and everything else. But
I've definitely seen it on there in the past.
You can still get this film, and I'm not, I don't want to advocate doing it illegally, but I do advocate watching this film. It is a tremendous, tremendous film. This is a weird pairing, but I'm going Absinthe on this one, because Absinthe, for all the things that people think about what it is and whether those are true or not, with wormwood and hallucinogenics and stuff, Absinthe is the perfect. It's a alcohol that if you drink it properly, it's a whole process. You got to pour it through a sugar cube. You got to drink it out of special glasses. It's a whole ceremonial thing. It lines up perfectly with the orchestration of this film. And then you have this, does it make you a little loopier than regular alcohol? I don't know. And that leans into this film. And I would say that it also, time period correct, would be the bottle you'd find in this old house of some kind of weird alcohol, and it would be Absinthe. And so that's why I'm going Absinthe for this movie. What do you think, Zach? Do you like this film?
I love it. It has a real kind of Henry James turn of the screw vibe to it. And I love the atmosphere. It was one of the first movies that made me realize I'd always been kind of lukewarm on Nicole Kidman. And it was like, oh, she's really good at the acting thing. She's terrific in it.
I want to diverge here for 1 minute. So with Nicole Kidman, what is it that makes you lukewarm on Nicole Kidman, and what brought you back around? I've always been a fan. I have to admit, I have, her risk taking is second to none.
Remember, this was like 20 years ago or whatever. So I had found her to be a bit kind of chilly and remote as an actress, and this was the first time, weirdly in a ghost story that I really kind of connected with her emotionally. That you really connected with her, with her, especially as a mother, with that character's emotional journey in that film. So that was what broke the ice, and now I'm a big fan.
She's perfectly cast in this film. You say like she's chilly and kind of distant and all these things, but also beautiful and like very seemingly fragile and not, very like hard-edged. I think that this is a perfect representation of how good she can be. And if you've seen like any of the HBO shows she's been in, or she puts herself through hell in these movies that she does. And this is just a great circular thing around all of her talents, I think. The Others and Absinthe.
Love it.
Which is my number 2 pick. So what do you guys have? Now we're to number 1.
I'm going to bring it back to Stephen King. I'm going to go with, it's not technically a film, it's a mini-series. I'm going with 1990, It. Yes. This is a film that, for many people, including myself, triggered chlorophobia. I hate fucking clowns because of this thing. Tim Curry, though, has to be said, excellent. This was adapted and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, who I thought it was nice for this as well, because he also wrote some episodes of, I think, the 80s Twilight Zone reboot. So that would have been the second, and just like Zach here has written for the early 2000s iteration of Twilight Zone. So I thought that was kind of fun. But yeah, so I used to, when I was young, I liked to kind of like late at night sneak around the house, either to get like snacks or to like watch what my parents were watching in the family room, because I knew they'd be putting on like the adult stuff and I didn't want to be excluded. Well, that really screwed me over. Most of the time it was like Monty Python and I thought it was hilarious. But this one particular night I got completely screwed over because they were watching it. And I did not sneak around the house much after that. It was absolutely fucking terrifying. I hate clowns. It's a great miniseries. Again, Curry is, God, he's wonderful and I adore him. But I'm going to pair this, and this is a little bit of a stretch, but it's not. I'm going to pair it with a spiked root beer float because we all float down here.
Love it. Love
You'll
it.
float too.
What would you spike it with? So what's the alcohol in there?
Probably rum.
I have a great relationship with this, and I have a lot of thoughts as an adult on it. This movie messed me up big time. I was 10 years old when it came out. It was an event on television, a true event. And
yeah, those ABC Stephen King, they did them like every year for like 7 or 8 years, and some of them were really good.
I think it was also, there's something about the way they did this that, speaking as a child, it stuck with us forever. I mean, the way they did this was not gory. It was very in your head and under your fingernails, whereas the new It is, you know, bloody and very, very jumpy, but there is an element of like showing you things you don't see, and they had to do it on television, so it makes sense. But like, I think what they did is they took the cast of so many shows. All of these people were on shows that were very popular at the time. And so what it did is it brought like the zeitgeist of so many things into this series that you're like, I know this person from X or Y or Z, and here they are in this show. And I just think it brought together a lot of pop culture, and it was a phenomenon, and it still is. I mean, I've had conversations recently with people as to whether the new iteration of the two movies or this are better. And I think, nostalgia speaking, I think that the first one sticks with me more, maybe.
They're very different animals.
You know, the story that the Duffer Brothers actually tried to get the assignment to do the remake. And
I went to school with those guys at Chapman.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
When they were passed on by Warner Brothers, they said, screw it, let's do our own version of It. And that's what Stranger Things became.
Thanks for passing, Warner Brothers.
It's like George Lucas trying to get the rights to Flash Gordon and creating Star Wars when he couldn't.
All right. So It 1990 with a spiked root beer float. That is excellent. Zach, I just want to say this pick. Oh my God. I wish I picked it. Man, do I wish. Great call on your number one.
My pick for number one, it's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It's Reanimator. It is the hilariously gory take on an H.P. Lovecraft story about young Herbert West's experiments with reviving the dead.
Herbert West is at the top of his class in medical school.
How can you teach such drivel? These people are here to learn, and you're closing their minds before they even have a chance.
He's brilliant, but a little weird.
I've broken the 6 to 12 minute barrier. I've conquered brain death.
You talk about mixing horror and comedy and turning horror into comedy. Stuart Gordon, the director here, does it, to my mind, every bit as well as Sam Raimi or Joe Dante. There are big laughs as well as big scares in this and big gross outs. And of course, there's the evil professor who looks bizarrely like Secretary of State John Kerry, who gets decapitated and comes back to life with and it gave the movie its tagline, Herbert West has a good head on his shoulders and another one in a dish on his desk. Like that was the movie's tagline.
It's a long ass tagline.
It's tremendous. It's funny. It's scary. It's gory. And I was thinking, like, I couldn't remember if anyone drank wine in it, and I was thinking, like, okay, it's Herbert West, it's Reanimator, based on an H.P. Lovecraft story. H.P. Lovecraft, lifelong resident of Providence, Rhode Island. He was a teetotaler, so he didn't drink. But when you think of Providence, what do you think of? You think of the best Italian food in America. And so I would pair it with a stormy and dramatic Etna Rosso, so
Ooh.
you can watch the action with the taste of a volcano in your mouth.
Love it.
That's
this
sexy.
is great. This is great.
I like that.
I do like big. And also just because I really love Mount Etna red wines.
Well, anybody with a brain who has ever had them loves red wines from Mount Etna. They're
so yeah, if you don't like them, you don't have a brain.
Well,
yeah, exactly.
I mean,
Dang, Jason.
And if you don't, well, I mean, that leads into this movie very well.
We had this, we had an amazing dinner at Mozza a few years back where they did pairings and they paired one of the courses with an Etna red, and it was sublime.
I think my whole life is led up to talking about this film, and I have to figure out how to do it in 2 minutes. My relationship with this movie, just really quick, is that when I'm trying to think the age I was. I'm going to say it was probably 14, 15 era, somewhere in there, maybe a little, give or take a year. I got my wisdom teeth out. So the night before I got my wisdom teeth out, I went to the video rental store and rented a ton of movies, almost all horror movies that I was going to watch because I was going to be out of commission because of getting my wisdom teeth out for the next 3 days. So I was like, I'm going to watch VHS and DVD movies over and over and over again. And I stacked up. I mean, I spent a ton of money. This is back in the day that you could rent movies.
Man, it's $3 a pop, man. That's a lot.
So the night before I was like, I'm going to dip into this stash. And I watched Reanimator for the first time. I'd never seen it. I'd read about it. I loved H.P. Lovecraft. I loved these movies. And I was like, how would you make a movie out of this? And I knew it was a cult film, and I watched it, and it scared the shit out of me, but also was very funny. You know, I mean, it's got like lines like, you know, it's got lines in it that are like, you killed him. No, I did not. I gave him life. Like, you know, these like out of control, like big things. And like, but I went to sleep it's an uneasy film. It's like when you're young, this movie is like really disturbing. When you're an adult and you watch it, it's very funny and the effects are kind of cheesy, but they're actually really good. But as a kid, I was terrified. And so then when I went in to get my wisdom teeth, I don't know if they still do this, but I got gas and they put me under. So when I was going under, I was talking about this movie. And so my mom and the doctors told my mom I was saying some very odd stuff. And I was saying about, you know, but I was talking about this movie that I had seen. So they said, when I put the gas, they're like, talk to us about anything. You seen any good movies recently? And I said, last night I watched Reanimator. And they're just like, you got to talk because it makes you go down. You know, it's just like a way to like put your mind somewhere else. I started talking about it. And the stuff I said as I was going under with the gas was very disturbing to them before they put me.
Before they used pliers to yank teeth out of your jaw.
And so this movie will always stick in my brain for my mother being like, whatever you said to these people was very weird. And they were like, you know, you said some weird stuff. Anywho, Reanimator is just a fantastic film. And I just love it so much. And there are multiple sequels, which none can live up to the first, but this one, it's boy, do I love this movie. If you've never seen it, you are in for a treat. I agree. Etna Rosso, popcorn, tons of bad junk food. Watch this film. You will not regret it, and you'll be so happy that you found this movie. Zach, what a great
Get your teeth
pick.
pulled the next day. Go for it.
Well, definitely. I'll always do that if you can.
Well, so Jason,
my number one.
Love this film, but what's your number one?
This is it. I'm the last one.
Yeah.
Last one.
So I have a film that I'm going to venture to say many people have not probably seen. And it's always my mission on these to try to pull one out that is something you have not seen. But this is not obscure for me. This is a movie that I've watched. If it's not 50 times, it's probably more. It's called Night of the Creeps.
The night of the fall is finally here. For Chris, Cindy, and JC. It's going to be the best night of their lives. But tonight is also the night of the creeps.
And it is everything. It's an alien film. It's a slasher film. It's a like sorority fraternity thriller It is a zombie film. It is literally has everything. And on top of that, it is so well executed and so aware of its own B-movie schlockiness and has some of the great actors of the genre in it. Tom Atkins is this hard-boiled guy that people may have seen from Lethal Weapon or other things. You recognize him immediately, but you're like, who's that guy? You know, he doesn't have a name. He's just in so many movies. He always plays a hard-boiled cop, and he's trying to solve an axe murderer who gets out of an asylum. And as an older man, he's trying to solve that same case, but there are these little creatures that land in a vial from outer space, and they jump in your mouth like little slugs, and then they turn you into a zombie. And so he is trying to solve this mystery as an old man who is down and out, smoking 5 packs a day, drinking incessantly, and it is just everything you want. It mixes everything from like Scream and any of the like alien and zombie movies you've ever seen. They're all wrapped up into this movie. And this movie has legs in so many modern horror films. And it's made by one of the absolute greatest directors you've never heard of. His name is Fred Decker. And he did a movie called House, which is one of the greatest premises ever made. He did a movie called Monster Squad that if you grew up my age, you watched 1,000,000 times. It is so good. And I don't know if it's forgotten to time. Night of the Creeps is a film you want to laugh and just have the best time you could possibly have with a group of people watching a film. This is the movie, Night of the Creeps. And you will watch it and go, hey, this is kind of like Slither, or this is kind of like Scream, or this is kind of like any axe murderer film. But they all came, like, this movie was derivative of movies that came in the 50s and knew it. And all those movies copied this movie.
Yeah,
and it's
like
still so
he
good.
was Fred Decker was kind of James Gunn before James Gunn.
100%.
That's cool.
100%.
I'm learning so much, you guys.
And so this is my number one pick because it is a stone cold masterpiece of the genre, which is, you know, what Tarantino does, or anybody who takes a lot of different movies and makes them their own. Fred Decker, I don't know if, was he too early, Zach?
Yeah, no, I think you hit it exactly right. That he was mixing genres together. He was mixing genres together before people were kind of ready for it. So it's he is the quintessential. You know, his films are the quintessential definition of cult classics.
Yeah, and I wonder how he feels about that. Man, would I love to talk to him, but he would be the guy for me in the wine world. Now, this is not what I'm pairing, but he would be like, you know, if Heidi Barrett, who made Screaming Eagle originally, had come around at that time, she'd have been too early, you know? But he's like the cult winemaker guy who, if he had come now, would be directing Marvel films and DC films. And I'm glad he's not. I'm glad he existed when he did, but he probably wishes that he had the money from today's era from what his talents are. But Night of the Creeps. Now, here's my pairing. My pairing is simple. This film takes place, the main plot, which is astounding after all of the stuff I just said, is about a handicapped guy and his best friend trying to pick up chicks at a sorority. These are like the nerds. They are guys who just can't get girls to like them, and they just want to be liked. And the thing is, like, how do we get chicks? And there's a prank that takes place where they have to steal a dead body from the lab on campus for like the medical students. They steal a body, and it happens to be a body from earlier in the film that is infected with these slugs, and everything goes absolutely bonkers. And so this movie has to be paired very specifically with Milwaukee's Best out of a keg. That's it. It has to have that.
Love it.
Milwaukee's Best flavor with the tinny keg quality that I know and love from college. And if you can find Keystone Light, that's fine too. But it has to be one of those keg beers, and it's got to come out of a keg, and there's no exception. But if you're going to watch this at home, you can drink a regular beer is fine.
Get a keg. Commit.
Or what do they call those, ponies? What are the little kegs that you can get?
Yeah, pony kegs. Little half kegs.
Just go get a pony keg and watch this movie. Do you guys have any, just to wrap up, do you guys have any ones you wanted to put on here that we didn't put on?
I think we covered it pretty well. Yeah, we've got to save something for next year.
I will say Night of the Creeps made me think, though, that you could also pair it with Mezcal that has one of those worms in the bottle.
Oh, God.
Since you got the, yeah.
That's a really good call.
That's the only thing I know.
Poltergeist 2.
Poltergeist 2? With the
Poltergeist 2 with the tequila worm.
And the worm goes in. That's right. The worm is
and he coughs it up, and it's like super nasty. Yeah,
that could also be Alien.
Yeah, Poltergeist 2 is actually not loved enough, but I love that movie.
Well, those are awesome. I learned a lot about film from both of you, and I have a list now of a few things I'm going to have to see.
Well, I can't wait to see you get your Ghostbusters on and Haunted Wineries.
Yes, the Ghost of Spring Mountain. I'm going to recap really quick our picks because everybody always asks us, and we never recap at the end. So I'm going to recap here. Claire picked for your films. You picked Sinister for your number 3, It for your number 2, the 1990 version, which is a miniseries.
Gremlins was one too.
Gremlins, that's right. And then Zach, you picked. Zach, you really some deep cuts here, Zach. I really love it.
I didn't want to go to the normal places. I picked The Beast Must Die from 1974. I picked Horror Express from 1972. And then I picked Reanimator, I believe, from 1985.
And I'm The Shining, The Others, and Night of the Creeps. You guys, it means the entire world that you stood with us through this whole entire podcast and the 2 glasses of wine or more that I had during it. And it really means a lot. Don't forget, go to SOMMTV.com, subscribe. Think about the holidays. They are coming. And this is a perfect opportunity to gift SOMM TV. Ghost of Spring Mountain trailer is coming. I have a very strong feeling it's out already. So if I'm behind the times on that, that's good for all of us. All right, everybody, please be safe. Watch one of these movies and enjoy Halloween. It's my favorite time. All right, be safe.